Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chaf, Volume 20, the second Sicha for Parshas Toldos. This Sicha will explain the true status of Esav and how indeed, in truth, in his root, in his source, he was really a great spiritual person, how this applies to us, and a practical hirah, practical directive for us. The verses that pertain to the Sicha that is worthwhile reviewing is chapter 25, verse 22, where it describes there how they struggled while still in the womb. Yaakov and Esav, each one wanted something. What is it? Well, Rivka felt when she walked by a place of Torah study and of kindness and benevolence, Yaakov struggled to get out, or she felt a tug. When it came to a place of idol worship, that's where she felt that Esav was trying to get out. Then in chapter 25, verse 27, it describes there how Vayigdilu Hana'arim, how when they became bigger, they became mature, they were bar mitzvah. And then it describes how Esav went off in his way. He became a hunter, a man of the fields, a man of the outdoors, while Yaakov was Ish Tom Yoshev Ahalim. He sat in the tents of Torah and Torah study. So to familiarize ourselves with some of the concepts, the sages tell us that while a fetus is still in the womb, an angel comes and studies Torah with the fetus, the entire Torah. However, right before the child is born, right before they go through the birth canal, the angel flicks them over the lip and they forget the entire Torah. The question is, what's the purpose of this? Why would you make them forget it once they know it? Well, the answer is because if they would know the whole Torah just like that, then they would never have the possibility for free choice. And free choice is the ultimate gift that we have. This determines whether our service of Hashem is indeed coming from us, and therefore, in order not to take away from a person free choice, we forget the entire Torah. On the other hand, the question becomes, if that's the case, then what's the whole point in teaching them in the first place? Well, the answer is, once you've learned it and it's somewhere there, you're subconscious, then you have a gravitation to it, you have a desire for it, a yearning for it. Another thing to be familiar with, the sages tell us, ha'avos hein hein amarkava, that the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they were like a chariot to the will of Hashem. What does it mean, like a chariot to the will of Hashem? Just like when you have a vehicle, you have a chariot. It doesn't have a mind of its own. It doesn't do what it wants to do. All its functions are directed, decided by the person riding that carriage, the person who is making it move. Likewise, they, even though they were living people and they had full lives, but everything they did was 100% consistent with Hashem's desire. Nothing was their own will, their own desire. Everything was Hashem's will. One more thing. It says, Maisei Avos Siman Labanim. The Ramban tells us that everything that happened to or with our patriarchs is a simon. Simon means a sign, or perhaps even you can say paves the way for the banim, for the children, meaning for all their descendants. Everything that happens to us or with us, or everything that we are capable of doing, they were the trailblazers. They are the ones who kind of opened the way for it. One more thing. There is a book called Shmoine Prokim LaHarambam. It's not really a book. It's the 8 chapters of the Rambam. What is this 8 famous chapters? This is the Rambam's introduction to Pirkei Avos, to Ethics of the Fathers. And in this introduction, in the span of 8 chapters, he explains at length and outlines the fundamentals of proper conduct, of proper character traits a Jew should have, and the fundamentals and principles of our faith. Let's get into the Sicha. So it says that in the verse 27, Vayigdilu Hana'arim, that they grew up, they matured, but it uses the word Vayigdilu from the word Gadol. Gadol means great. So indeed the Medrash and also the Zohar tell us that what does this mean? That both of them, Yaakov and Esav, were great in a spiritual sense. However, later on, it's Esav that unfortunately went off, as he says, kilkel. He ruined things, kilkel asmasav, and he became a rasha, he became a wicked one. Now we need to understand, this seems to contradict totally what we learned earlier in the parsha, When it says Vayisroitetzu Habana Bikirba, when it says in verse 22 that they struggled within the womb, what happens? What did the sages tell us? That already from the beginning, Esav was leaning towards, was gravitating to Avodah Zarah, to negativity. So how could we go here and say that they were both elevated to a very high, lofty spiritual level? Moreover, what does it say in this very verse? In verse 27, 28, where it says, after they matured, what does it say? Vayehi Esav ish Yedei Tzayid. That Esav became a skillful hunter, he was a man of the fields, and so on. Then immediately he went off to a no-good path. So how do we make this argument that only later he became deteriorated, but really in the beginning he was all good? How do we say that in the same time that we say that already in the beginning he was gravitating towards Avodah Zarah? Now perhaps, maybe one would suggest to answer along the lines, based on the idea of what we introduced in the introduction, that just like a baby is taught the entire Torah while it's still in the womb, and later it's made to forget it in order for it to have free choice. So maybe likewise the same happened with Esav. That while he's in the womb, yes, he had this disposition to go towards Avodah Zarah, to idolatry and negativity. However, before he came out of the womb, he was made to forget everything. And now, when he made a bad choice, it wasn't on that accord, it was because he made a bad choice. And perhaps then you could say, argue that they were spiritually great, they meaning also Esav. However, says the Rebbe, that's not a sufficient answer. Why? Because at the end of the day, if indeed in the womb he had some disposition, a gravitation towards Avodah Zarah, then even if he was made to forget it, just like we said in the reason why they taught Torah in the first place, even if he was made to forget it, but some remnant of it, some mark, an indelible mark is left for the rest of their life. And therefore, going back to it, how is it possible to say that they were indeed spiritually great? They meaning also Esav, when if he had a predisposition to Avodah Zarah from the beginning. So, the Rebbe says, to understand this, we'll introduce another saying from the Chazal, on this very same verse of Vayisroitetzu Habana Bikirba, that they struggled amongst each other. Say the Chazal, what were they struggling about? What were they fighting? I mean, listen, if you want this, you go your way, I go my way. Why are they fighting? Well, they were struggling, they were arguing over the Nachlas Shnei Oilamos, the inheritance, or the acquisition of both worlds. Which world? Olam Hazeh, literally this world, and Olam Haba, the world, or the material world versus the spiritual world. Now you can ask, what exactly are you arguing about? It seems so obvious that Esav is interested in Olam Hazeh, in this world, and Yaakov is interested in Olam Haba. So why the argument? Why the fight? This must lead us to a conclusion to say that Esav wanted not only Olam Hazeh, but he also desired Olam Haba. And vice versa, Yaakov, not only was he interested primarily in Olam Haba, but he felt a need also for Olam Hazeh. But what exactly does Esav, what does this mean? What does Esav do with Olam Haba? Why would he need it? So this we will understand by taking a closer look or getting a deeper understanding of what the Chazal tell us, that already within the womb, Esav had a gravitation towards Avodah Zarah. Because you can ask, it doesn't seem to make sense. Since, as we said in the introduction, that the Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, everything they did was 1,000% consistent with Hashem's will. No other way. And therefore, how is it possible that a descendant, somebody who was conceived from Yitzchak, is coming into this world through Yitzchak, that he should even have any whatsoever connection to, let alone a strong gravitation towards Avodah Zarah, towards idolatry? The fact that later in life he gravitated towards it, okay, you can argue that's his own bad decision making. That's his own free choice that he employed. But to say that already from the womb he had a disposition, it doesn't make sense. Where did it come from? The answer is, based on what we also introduced in the introduction. We explained that Maaseh Avos Siman Labanim, that everything that happens with the banim, with the children, with the descendants, that's us, all happened with and to the Avos, the Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That means, practically speaking, that all manners of avodah, of service of Hashem, that apply to us, we can find by them are incorporated in their service of Hashem. Now this brings us to the Shmoina Prakim LaRambam. In the Shmoina Prakim LaRambam, the Rambam explains at length the two general modes of avodah, of service of Hashem. And he breaks it down in the following manner. There is the Chassid HaMa'ula, which we'll call basically the lofty pious one, somebody who to begin with has no negative desires, has no negative traits, and his whole ambition, his whole endeavor is to get higher and higher and higher and closer to Hashem. Then on the other hand, you have the Kovesh Es Yitzray, the person who is always busy with suppressing his bad desires. That means indeed he has bad desires, he has all kinds of negative inclinations and temptations, but he overcomes it by constantly suppressing it and beating it. The question is, it's one thing if you say the Chassid HaMe'ula, the great lofty pious one, okay, that's obvious that you can find it mirrored in the life of the Avos, of the patriarchs. But where do you have the Kovesh Es Yitzray? Where would you find that in Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Did they have negative inclinations, temptations? Moreover, in the Kovesh Es Yitzray, the ultimate is the Baal Tshuva. Now, what is a Baal Tshuva? Baal Tshuva, literally speaking, is somebody that already had committed a sin, already had crossed the line, had succumbed to their temptations, and now they're coming back. Now they're suppressing all of that and having remorse and coming and doing tshuva, coming back to Hashem. So where do we find it in the others? Now the fact that we do know that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov did have many external challenges that they have to deal with and combat, that's still not a good source for this. Why? Because notice over here it's a Kovesh Es Yitzray, one who suppresses their own evil inclination. You cannot compare combating an external challenge than combating an internal challenge. External challenges actually is not so difficult to deal with. But when one has internal challenges, they're being pulled internally, the temptation and the lust and the desire, and yet they're able to suppress it, that requires a much greater level of strength, of inner strength. Where does that come from? This is the key. This is the answer. You see, how does one find the inner strength? How does one have that strength to be able to capture and to suppress their inner desires, their temptations, their inclinations? That is when one has such a strong, phenomenal bond with Hashem that fuels his strength. That fuels the strength necessary to overcome even the most greatest challenges from within, from one's internal desires and temptations. This we do find by the Avos. This we have parallel by the Avos. That ultimate connection with Hashem that does not allow them in any way to stray from that connection, that we get from the Avos, and that translates itself to us in the mode of a Kovesh Es Yitzray. And the same is, of course, by Baal Tshuva, right? When he went away from Hashem, now he's coming back. Where does it come from? From that inner, deep-rooted desire that every Yid has, that we receive passed down from the Avos. Now that helps him to overturn even the negative and come back to Hashem. This Gvura we get from the Avos. Now, since we just determined that we have some parallel in this divide between these two modes of Avodah, the Chassid HaMe'ula, the lofty pious one, and the Kovesh Es Yitzray, the one who has to deal with the challenges and suppress his desires. Therefore, now we can find it mirrored in their actual offspring, not just generally speaking in all the future descendants like ourselves. And this is where we find the difference between Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov is obviously the Chassid HaMe'ula, that lofty pious one, and therefore it expressed itself, it reflected itself, right? Translated itself into him being Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Alim, somebody who sat in the tents of study all the time. Whereas Esav, he was a man of the fields. He was somebody who had to deal with the world. And he is obviously the koivishas yitzur, the one who has to suppress all his desires. In other words, he had this disposition not to bring him down, but because his objective, the objective of his purpose, that is, was to be a koivishas yitzur. So Yaakov's purpose was to be the chassid hama'ula, whereas Esav, his purpose is to be koivishas yitzur. Now, of course, by the avos, there was no possibility whatsoever for actual bad, an actual entity of bad. It would never have resulted. It would never have translated into Ra. Whereas by their Toldos, by their offspring, even their closest offspring, but once it's offspring, that means it's separate from them. Over there is some possibility, and unfortunately, as it did manifest itself in Esav, it ultimately did become actual bad. This now will help us understand what they were arguing about. Why were they arguing on both worlds? You see, when they were still in the womb, as we said, they were still in the realm of holiness. They weren't shaykh to any bad. The difference between them was what exactly is the emphasis. What type of avodah? Yaakov's focus was on elevating oneself to Hashem, as we said before, whereas Esav's focus and appreciation was of the work that one has to do in Olam Hazeh, in this world, transforming it, and of course first by suppressing the bad and then transforming it. And therefore their struggle was, each one of these two, the Chassid HaMe'ula versus the Koivishas Yitzray, needs to have both worlds. True, their main focus is on one, but they also need the other. The Chassid HaMe'ula, his main focus is on Olam Haba, elevating himself. He's always looking upward. But he also knows that you need to have this world. You need to do mitzvahs. You need to live in this reality. So he also wants that. Whereas Esav, he knows that his main objective, his main approach is Olam Hazeh. That's his main endeavor. But he also needs Olam Haba. He understands that you need Torah, you need the lofty in order to have the strength, in order to fuel that fire to be able to overcome the negativity in this world. And now we'll appreciate what it means when it says, Vayigdulu Ha'arim. They became mature, they became great. And we said it means that they were both on a very spiritual level, on a high spiritual level. That indeed, yes, Esav was also great spiritually speaking. Why? Because it's obvious. Who brought him up? He got his chinuch, his education from Yitzchak, and from his grandfather, Avrohom. So obviously he was on a great level that even he was indeed, not only potentially, but at that moment, he was a person who was koivishas yitzur. The fact that it says Isada, that he was a man of the fields, and we asked before, that means he was already, it's not negative. You can actually understand it in a very positive sense. He was involved in this world. He was working through and with the aspects of this world. In fact, one of the tactics sometimes to overcome an enemy, to defeat an enemy, is to use their tactics. And this idea that Asa was able to be conniving and he was able to use the worldly tactics against it in order to elevate it to Kedusha, that's actually a positive, not a negative. As an example for it is, let's say when you use things in this world, you use it l'shem shamayim, then you elevate everything. However, this is only as long as he was under the influence of Abraham and Yitzchak. Sadly, later, soon as he went away, unfortunately, he was niskalkel, as they said. He got somewhat ruined, spoiled, and he resorted to becoming actual bad. And this interesting explanation says the Rebbe also parallels what the Alter Rebbe explains, something towards the end of the parsha. Why is it that Yitzchak wanted to give the blessings to Esav? He didn't know who Esav was at that point? He did. But he looked at Esav and his potential. He looked at Esav not as he was in actuality, but the fact that he had the potential, and Dafke, he has the potential to really elevate the world. And that's why he felt that maybe the blessing should go to him so he can actually push him and, so to speak, put him in that mode, put him in that trajectory of actually elevating the world. However, in actuality, Yaakov Avinu received it, because at the end of the day, in order to be successful in all of this, you need to have actual Yeshiv oil, you need to be connected to Torah study, and only through that can you make a Dira B'Tachtonim. Says the Rebbe, what is the lesson for all of us? That notwithstanding the fact that we are descendants of Yaakov, which obviously means that our primary focus should be learning Torah, but we're not going to lock ourselves up, so to speak, just to learning Torah. We have to also go out in the world. We have to go out in the world first with the introduction of Torah. First, you have to, so to speak, get your basic training by learning a lot of Torah, by having Torah. Once you have that strength, then you go into the world. Even if you have to, so to speak, get dressed in the levushim of the world, meaning you have to sometimes speak the language of the world, sometimes get also acquainted with the norms of the world and society as it is, only with the intention, with the purpose of using that to conquer the world. A good common day example, I'm thinking perhaps, would be somebody who's, even he's a yeshiva bachar, somebody who's a frum yid, but knows about social media and things like that. Why? Not because you're going to use it in order to pull yourself down. On the contrary, you're going to utilize the social media in order to expose other Yidden who maybe otherwise would not have that opportunity, to elevate the world, to bring them closer to Torah and to mitzvahs.